football channel of orangebloods.com on YouTube. I'm Geoff Ketchum, joined by Anwar Richardson. We are less than 24 hours away from the Texas spring game, where we get a chance to see our first public perception of the 2021 Texas Longhorns under Steve Sarkisian. And Anwar, we've been doing videos all week long. I want to tell people as they're joining in, hit that little subscribe button, give the video a like. We appreciate both of those things as we move towards our quest for the first 1,000 subscribers of the channel. Apologies for me doing the show today, Anwar, and it's kind of a urine-colored room, at least from my perspective. So I will have to change the lighting filter or something. It looks like you're in your living room, but we're here. We're good. We're ready to talk some Texas spring game on the eve of the Texas spring game.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. You're not here, but we got some rain that's going on right now, Kat. So yes, I'm actually in the kind of like the dining room area of my home at this moment. Yeah, all is good. We're making it work. I came out my office just for a little bit because I felt like the internet was, might be stronger here. So, but we still got plenty of time to talk Texas football.
We talked about yesterday on the back end of the Casey Thompson, Hudson Card, I guess, first media interviews of the spring that they did yesterday. And we thought, well, we'll focus on David Benda maybe and talk a lot of Texas defense. And I think there's definitely space to do that. But it is the eve of the spring game, which, it is natural to just say that, without treating it like the Longhorn Super Bowl, it is kind of a big moment of truth. We haven't seen the team in 4 months. We've never seen it under Steve Sarkisian. So, on one hand, you don't want to make too big a deal out of it, but it's a big deal. Like they want 25,000 people to show up. Their big name recruits are showing up, a couple of 5-stars that are critical to Texas recruiting. So it is kind of a big deal. Your thoughts, just as we get started, on the fact that, the moment has almost arrived.
What's interesting, Catch, because we haven't had spring football in a year. We got to remember, like last year, we never had spring football. It was that Texas they went on a break and a spring break, and they didn't come back for months. It just didn't come back for months, and it's just so funny because it's like, all right, it'll be a matter of time, and all our stories every road. And so you had a previous staff, Catch, that never really had that spring to work with these guys, to really implement stuff. And they always talked about, we were able to implement stuff in the offseason. They did it. They later admitted that they needed some catch-up work that needed to be done. And so it'd be interesting, Steve Sarkisian, and, they didn't have one at Alabama last year. I mean, now, I don't know if they ever need one at Alabama, but they didn't have one at Alabama, and they got canceled, the day of. So it's interesting for us to actually in our return to a normal world, we're actually going to have spring football, and it gives us a peek behind the curtain of what this team, could or cannot look like. Give us a chance to just lay eyes on people, not through sources, but just through our own eyes as to what all the guys look like from an offensive standpoint, a defensive standpoint. So, it's good. I'm happy that we actually are having spring football because, like I said, it's been such a long time for us having it. So the new coaches, I'm just going to be curious. There's so many things. Someone asked before, like, what am I going to keep an eye on in spring football? And my answer was everything. Like, I'm going to keep an eye on everything. And I'm probably going to rewatch this thing probably more than any other spring football game because once we finally get it into, there's so many intriguing plot lines.
Yeah, it's funny. We've spent all week talking really about the offensive side of the ball. A couple of days kind of dedicated towards the quarterbacks. We had the BJ. What am I doing? My Bijan. I got too many names in my head. The Bijan Robinson conversation took place on Wednesday, which, by the way, you can check out all those videos on the YouTube channel. Just subscribe to it, and all that stuff will be right there. You can go back and watch it throughout the weekend if you want to. I wonder if tomorrow ends up being a day where the Texas defense assumes a bigger presence than the public discussion often allows for. it's offense, offense, offense with Steve Sarkisian, at least the way I think we talk about it, especially since the Bijan Robinson factor. There's a quarterback battle. There have been so many offensive discussions taking place. The defense has been pretty good under a new defensive coordinator from everything that we've heard so far this spring. You've got a defensive line that is controlling the line of scrimmage, play in and play out against an offensive line that is unsettled, I think, at this point. And so you've seen the Keandre Coburns of the world really, he's already one of the better defensive linemen in the Big 12. He's winning his battles daily. And we've kind of been hearing that guys in the secondary have been playing well. You know, Josh Thompson's name was coming up every day up until the last week or so. And so it feels like there's a lot of defensive parts that a lot of people haven't paid a lot of focus on over the course of the last month that might be buzzwords tomorrow. And I don't necessarily mean the guys that we've never seen before. I just think we may see some of these guys. We may see a guy like Deshaun Jameson make some plays in the spring game and go, oh yeah, in the middle of a season that wasn't everything that we wanted it to be a year ago, there's still some pretty good players coming back. And I think that, you know, we sometimes get lost on the fact that there's turnover at linebacker and they're trying to find that pass rush answer. But this is still a defense that brings back guys that were pretty good players a year ago, and under better defensive coaching leadership, they should be able to make the type of improvement that we think the offensive guys can make when they've got better coaching.
Catch that. Are you implying that the cake is baked?
No.
Oh, okay.
But I think that some of the cake is in the bowl. You know what I mean? Like, I think that if you're baking a cake, I think ingredients are there. And I think that, you know, the defense the last couple of years just wasn't noteworthy, really. Right? I mean, a year ago, there was a whole lot of, if Joseph Osai showed up, big things could happen. But in game, and he was an inconsistent player a year ago. And so, you know, it was the defense under, you know, in the last couple of years, you know, going back obviously to Todd Orlando, it wasn't consistent enough. And so here they are again in another coordinator change. This will be the third defensive coordinator in 3 years for these defensive players. We've always counted offensive coordinators, right? But now each of these dudes, I mean, imagine if you're like a third-year player. You just everything's new every spring. And
Josh Thompson told me he's had like 4 DB coaches since he's been here.
Yeah. And I think he's liked them all, right? Like, he must be thinking, what am I getting? So I think it may be a little bit of an undersold headline that the defense has been playing as well as it has through the first 14 days of workouts, because I don't know that Texas fans went into this spring thinking that the defense was potentially a definite strength. And I don't know that we can say that yet, but the early returns in the spring is that it has a chance to be.
Yeah, I mean, like when we hear about like the standouts and the studs, you know, we've heard about, you know, Bijan, we've heard about Roschon, we've heard about Jordan Whittington, right? And then, of course, on the defensive side, Catch, we've heard a little bit, you know, buzz. Obviously, I say a little buzz, a lot of buzz about Ray Thornton, but there's a lot of good talent there. I think, Catch, to your point, that's on the defense. It doesn't get a lot of pub, but Catch, I mean, we've heard that the offensive line has struggled. If they're struggling, that means the defensive line is playing well. So we've heard about Keandre Coburn and how well he's doing. We've heard about Jacoby Jones coming off the edge. We've heard about Ray Thornton being a guy that has the ability to come off the edge. You know, we have a spring that we haven't had DeMarvion Overshown because he's nursing that shoulder injury, but we're still hearing about productivity from the linebacker position with a David Benda. And then you go back And to echo what you're talking about Josh Thompson, who is, obviously one of the leaders of that defense. Deshaun Jameson is another guy. And then, you've got Chris Atmore and Anthony Cook battling for that nickel spot. Those guys are good. And we've heard about you still got Darian Dunn, who is a guy that came in with a lot of, hype and belief that this guy could be an NFL player at some point. So when you look from a defensive perspective, there seems to be a lot of talent. It would make sense why we hear about, the defense having success, in a lot of these scrimmages and having interceptions in these scrimmages and standing out and being able to get to the quarterback. And you've heard things, Sarkisian say certain things about how the offensive line has struggled. Because they're allowing too many sacks. Some of that's on the quarterback, some of that's on the offensive line. So the defense doesn't get a lot of pub, and we've been focused in a lot from an offensive perspective on the battles. The Casey Thompson battle, Jordan Whittington looking good, and what else is at that receiver position. But that defense, what Kwiatkowski has there, and a lot of it seems to be a little bit similar to what they did last year with Chris Ash. At least that's what a lot of the players say. Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what those guys look like. And really, I know you don't want to say the cake is baked. But there are enough ingredients where you feel like you could have some sort of dessert at some point in December, and especially because the defense has the potential to be better.
Yeah, no, I think the cool thing about the defensive side of the ball tomorrow is there's a much better chance that the fans watching on television or inside the stadium will come away talking about names they haven't talked about all month. So, it's not the sexiest conversation in the world to talk about what's happened in the defensive backfield, for instance. But, there's a chance that you'll see some bodies and some young guys emerge that you'll go, oh, okay. And who knows, even a guy like Brendan Schooler on some level, it's our first chance to see him at safety. And, Alex has been reporting earlier this week, this is a guy that's is with the twos at safety after having played wide receiver a year ago. He had been a starter at Oregon, and this is a chance for him to reintroduce himself a little bit. And he's not the only guy. We've hinted around it, but David Benda is a guy that has drawn praise all throughout camp of that linebacker position. He's been the guy that I've had the info relayed back to me, that he's the guy that I think people feel most certain about with DeMarvion Overshown out this spring. All the guys that have come back, he's showed up day in and day out on a level that's been different than everybody else at the position. We saw very small glimpses of him last season, but when he played, he looked the part. He played the part. So I think he's a guy tomorrow that I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up looking like one of the best players on the field tomorrow, because that Texas offensive line hasn't been overly assertive so far this spring. I think the defensive side of the ball comes in with a perceived advantage. And, if that's the case, if that's what transpires, then that means that David Benda is going to be in a position to play behind the guys that are controlling the line of scrimmage. And it may be that he flashes a little bit more than some other guys that we're all showing up to watch. I think he could be a guy that a lot of people are talking about when this thing's over with. I do wonder, can we see anything in it? Because, the quarterbacks can't be touched. So will we emerge from the spring game feeling like we know or have an indication of what the pass rush looks like? It feels like that would be a difficult thing to do in a spring game for the reasons that we're talking about. You can't put the quarterback on the ground necessarily. But I wonder how much fool's gold is there. You know what I mean? It is the thing, you just mentioned it. If your offensive line is struggling, then that means your defensive line is not as much, right? That means they're playing well to some degree. But depending on where this offensive line is, it does make you wonder how much of what the defense has been doing is real, right? So when they go play Oklahoma, does what they've been doing against the Texas offense translate? We won't be able to know tomorrow. It is the one thing, it is the tough thing about judging players on the same team against each other, because for one guy to look really good, if Jordan Whittington has a 75-yard touchdown tomorrow, it means he burned somebody for 75 yards.
Yeah.
So there's a yin and yang to this.
Yes.
And then you ask yourself that question, like, is Jordan Whittington that good, or does Texas have a problem with the guy that was matched up against Whittington in coverage? And the truth of the matter is, it's always probably somewhere in the middle of those two things, never quite an extreme, but that nailing down that middle ground is one of the toughest things I think everybody in sports has to do with any team before a season starts. It's really hard to gauge in any sport, whether it's baseball and spring training, right? Those stats never matter. It never matters what a guy did in spring training. The real thing starts and everything changes. Again, it almost feels like a cautionary tale. Don't get too carried away by whatever happens tomorrow, but I'm looking forward to talking about some new names.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Whoever does successful on one side of the ball, then we're going to complain about what's happened on that other side of the ball. It's the, oh my gosh, like, look at Bijan and what a tremendous run that he had. And it's like, well, look at those missed tackles. It just all depends on how you want to view it and how you want to view that prism. There probably just needs to be plays made on both sides. Just nothing astronomical, right? You can't have Jordan Whittington scoring 5 touchdowns or 6 touchdowns in the game, because now you're going to have a little bit of worry. You have 1 or 2 touchdowns is probably okay, but you don't want him to go ham. So, but to your point, it would be good to see some good names. I mean, Justin Daniels asked some really good questions about Tyler Owens and what's the latest on him. And we've heard that he's been described as big, athletic, playing at that linebacker position, and want to put him a little bit closer to the line to see what he can do. We know he's got that speed from high school, so he's a guy that kind of gives them, some depth, at a lot of, different positions, but, they need some depth rather at linebacker. So him being close to the ball is someone that you hope to hear a little bit more of. All these receivers, Catch, we've talked about them before. Once we get Joshua Moore, I mean, he's a guy that, we probably need to find out a little bit more of. I mean, we've heard the Cavante Dixons of the world and Marcus Washingtons, but, we're still, what's going to happen with, Joshua Moore when you start, like you said, other names that are out there. I mean, from a defensive line perspective, I mean, we've barely heard Vernon Broughton's name, but he's a guy that do we hear a little bit more of? We know he's got some talent there. So, yeah, you're right, Catch. It's one of those things that you probably look at and say, oh, snap. Yeah, I remember that guy. And, he didn't get a lot of love, but here he is. And, we'll try not to overreact or underreact, even though more than likely we'll overreact to whatever we see, because that's just what we do. I'll be interested to see some of the guys who, of course, Catch to perform under the lights. Like there's something to be said for getting in front of a stadium, even if it's 25,000 people. There's still something to be said of what you do outside of a normal practice setting, because at some point, Catch, the hard part about practice notes and practice reports, we report about a guy making a play. Well, he made one play, but out of how many? It's one play out of how many. So yes, after the umpteenth time that he went against someone in practice, he made a play, and we write about it like, oh my gosh, he made it. Well, it's like, it may have been 1 or 2, it may not be the collective whole. So, but it'd be interesting to still see when the lights are on and it matters, because, I think the previous staff would tell you it's just one other practice. This staff is saying it's not just one other practice. It does kind of measure a lot in how we assess people. So it's going to be interesting to see how they respond when it's really time to play in front of a crowd and have all that adrenaline.
I was going to go with a buy or sell question about a couple of different things, but to your point, this kind of sidebar discussion for a second. To the thing that you said just then, I feel like this happened to Casey Thompson immediately after the Alamo Bowl, right? So, because I can remember you and I talking about a conversation that you had where our view of what Casey Thompson did that night was just on a different planet than what the people inside the Texas football program on the coaching staff thought of that performance, at least as it related to what it meant moving forward. And it just makes me wonder, what could Casey have looked like in practice that those guys, they don't matter now. They're not here. But in the few days that existed between the end of that bowl game and their dismissal, there was this conversation of what that performance meant. And it felt like at the time the coaches inside the football department were saying what you just said, but they were saying that with game reps. Like Casey Thompson did that. And there was a very much a dismissal, a poo-pooing, if you will, of that performance. And they seem to be holding it up against all of the hundreds and thousands of reps that they had seen prior to that. And we were dumbfounded by it, right? Like you and I both were like, that's just crazy to think that you wouldn't have seen what you saw in the game and not put that on a completely different pedestal than anything else you had ever seen in practice. But all these coaches have these things that you just talked about, these thousands of reps or hundreds of reps where they look at whatever happens in a 10 rep, 10 throw sample size in a game. And they were kind of dismissive about it. It makes me wonder, under the old staff, what Casey Thompson was or wasn't doing day in and day out that just made that so easy for them immediately after the performance to not want to make a big deal out of it. Because I think you and I were like ready to do cartwheels based off what we'd seen.
I mean, absolutely. And it was always fascinating to see that there was almost a, I won't say poo-pooing of it, but almost like, okay, that's good. And that's the outlier, because we really think Hudson Card is the guy going forward. So it was very fascinating to know that that's how they, felt about it. And look, I mean, within the spring, you talk to your people and there seems to be still a fascination with Hudson Card and what that looks like. So, I just wonder, when the lights are on and it counts and, everything's going, how much does it really matter? And I think the game does for the quarterback battle. Like I can't suspend disbelief and say, well, if one guy goes up and just looks super average and we see Casey Thompson do exactly what he did versus Colorado, that they're just going to turn around and say, well, that was just one practice. But they're looking for a reason to give someone the job. And so if that what happens, then I think, it plays to the benefit of whichever quarterback that is. But there is a fascinating thing as relates to Casey, Ketch, because if you go off of just the eye test and what you've seen, you would say this is not close, or God forbid, it ain't even close. But then, obviously, as we know, like, well, there's some separation, because obviously Casey gets most of the reps, but it's not a slam dunk by any stretch of imagination.
All right. I feel like I may be asking a bit of a risky question. So those of you watching on YouTube just need to get ready for the fact that I occasionally ask risky questions and do risky things. Look, I can't say that I know the ins and outs of what all of our competing sites are writing. I don't. I have people who I see comments on Orange Bloods occasionally that'll say, hey, this runs in line with what so-and-so has said and whatever. I'm under the impression that at least two of our competitors are writing that Hudson Card is ahead of Casey Thompson based on play this spring by a smidge. And I don't know that I would quite go that far, but I've said that during the course of the last week that I had been hearing Hudson's name more than I was hearing Casey Thompson's name. So no matter where a Texas Longhorn fan gets his information at this point, whether it's on Orange Bloods or it's on a competing site, there is a building narrative that Hudson Card is ahead on some level of this. And I don't feel like I'm stretching your words to say that you don't buy that you don't buy that at this point that's a thing. And we had this conversation yesterday, so I don't want to have the same conversation that we had yesterday again today. I think we both admitted yesterday, neither one of us thinks that if this were a race, 100 meters, that either guy is a body length in front of the other guy. But I feel like the public narrative when this thing comes out of this spring, unless something happens tomorrow and changes everything. But I feel like there is a feeling amongst the reporting that's taking place that Card is, by varying degrees, depending on the words being used and the people reporting them, that he has moved ahead. And it's an interesting conversation because, as you outlined, the only game sample size we have is very one-sided in the other guy's direction. And the other guy who's not getting this kind of praise, whatever we want to call it, accolades or acknowledgement, he's not the guy that's running out first with the first team every day either. So I don't know. It's hard to completely, I'm babbling somewhat now, but it's hard to completely wrap my head around all of those things together. Something has to be off a little bit, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is you and I conversation. This has nothing to do. I don't want to make it about what other people are reporting or anything to that effect. Like, I don't want to, set off that time bomb because God knows, and there's source wars, and everyone pumps it up and wants a huge fight between OB and everybody else. So
I'm just trying to acknowledge that when this thing is over with, I think that there will be some public discourse that Hudson's got a slight lead, and that doesn't feel fair. Like I'm Team Hudson, but I don't know that I feel fair. Like, I don't know that I feel comfortable saying that just yet for all the reasons that you've outlined.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what's being said, whether it's through others, what they've reported, which, it always ends up on OB anyway. So it just makes it, if it's on OB, then I'll see it. It
always ends up on OB.
It always does on Orange Blood. So it's just kind of like whatever's reported, so like aggregated. So it's all good. It's just, it's hard for me to suspend like disbelief in this thing. That's what I'm saying. Like I'm applying logic to it, and maybe logic shouldn't apply to certain things, but I do have to take a step back and say, let me apply some logic and even go past what happened last year, which I don't think you can ignore. I can't ignore that was the first impression that Steve Sarkisian ever had of Casey Thompson. Like he knew he was about to take that job, and I don't know how many University of Texas games Steve Sarkisian ever watched, but he did get a chance to watch that game. And that was a hell of a first impression, obviously, because he had eventually got on the phone not too long after that and said he was pretty excited about the young talent that was there. Now, they did go back and watch practices, and they did break down that film. And so he does have an overall standing. We've heard about Hudson Card looking good in practices. I'm talking about last year's practices. And then, of course, what we have this year. But I don't know if it's just lip service that Casey Thompson is getting with the ones, and you're like, it's hard to believe that it was a 100% accident that Denzel Okafor about a week or so ago slipped and said that Casey Thompson was getting all the reps with the ones, and Hudson Card came in every once in a while. And the University of Texas pretty much wanted to act like that never existed, right? They wanted to put the little thing and make sure your memory goes away, like Will Smith, and because they deleted it from their website. Like it never happened. And then, when you delete something, it brings more attention to it, right? We also understand we live in a social media world that when you decide to put something out there and then there's a little buzz or firestorm, the moment you delete it, it's like, aha, got you. So it's almost better to leave it up as opposed to, to make it a deal. So I'm supposed to believe that a guy who is a sixth-year player doesn't know who's running out there with the first team. Like, I don't, that's where I kind of struggle with it a little bit. I'm like, it has nothing to do or say like Hudson Card is not a baller. Like this is not that. Like Hudson Card is a baller. Like we heard that, we know that, all those things to be true. But in this competition where one guy's getting the bulk of it, one guy has more years of experience, one guy is the person that's leading the charge for them, and then and a teammate comes out and says he's getting all the reps. I don't know how I'm just supposed to somehow negate all those facts and say, yeah, but Hudson Card could be the next Aaron Rodgers. I just don't know how I'm supposed to do that.
I mean, all that's fair. I mean, it really is. It also, there's another consistent theme that's taking place, which is Hudson Card in the structure of practice might just be better than Casey Thompson. You know what I mean? In terms of some general text down here was like Card versus Casey, whose arm is stronger, who's more accurate in short throws and long throws, and he's like asking the point by point kind of breakdown of it. And if you do it just like that and you say, well, who has the better arm? Well, okay, Hudson has a better arm. And who's more accurate in short throws? Okay, well, maybe Hudson over the course of 15 practices is more accurate. And, as they chart these things, is just more accurate on certain throws. And you go as a scrambler, Casey's got an edge. You can kind of go down that list. And at the end of it, you can break it down in a way where you can see how in practice, maybe he grades out better. I can't help but know, well, the wild card in this is Casey Thompson. And you and I have done shows going back 4 months where we've said the safest, smartest thing to do is to let Casey Thompson be the starter in September to start the season as the starter. And if he plays well, the questions answer themselves and you don't have to worry about a transfer per se. You do if you make Hudson Card the starter. I just wonder, do you think we'll get to a point in games this season where this thing's ongoing? Or do you believe let's live in a world for a second where both guys stay for the entire season. So there's no transfer out. However it is that has to happen. Do you think whoever that starter is, if we can ignore the shadow of the backup, do you think that starter will keep the job all season long in a world where both of them are there? Or does this play out in September through early October until someone under this staff in games has truly separated?
And if that's the case, I mean, aren't they screwed?
Maybe.
If that's the case, because what you're talking about in that scenario is the optimistic, they're getting by, but it's not sexy. And so now optimistically, you pull the trigger on someone else. But that means Louisiana was a life or death kind of game, some sort of struggle, right?
Oh, yeah.
That means Arkansas was life or death, potentially a loss, right? And then, you have Rice to regroup, and then you start going into your conference games, and now all of a sudden it's just not looking good. But more than likely, you're probably talking about a couple of losses in order for that to happen. So, so to answer your point, and I would agree. I mean, that Michael goes back to the age old thing. Like I if none of these guys distinguish themselves, I think Texas is fucked. Just, people have asked how come we haven't cursed on these things like we used to curse on the podcast, by the way. So I felt intentional that I had to do that because it felt like we were being too corporate, Ketch. And that's not what we do. No, I think they're totally in a bad situation if that happens. I think
the gamblers just lost. There's only really savvy bettors who are taking long odds thought you would drop an F-bomb on YouTube before me.
Well, yes, someone needs to do a shot if that's the case.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, Catch, I don't see that. And the thing is, Catch, I'd have to go back, I have to go look, but from what I remember offhand about Sarkisian, he seems to have his guy. Right. I haven't really seen a lot. And again, this situation may be different. But I have to go to what year was Sarkisian just kind of undecided about who his quarterback was. Like his resume seems to be a guy that's my guy. And by the way, that's my guy. He's going to be pretty damn good. I mean, we don't have a long list of really crappy Sarkisian quarterbacks. So I get the feeling like if he has his guy, Texas is good. And by the way, I'll say this though, Ketch. Here's the reason why I don't think that scenario can occur. Because if Casey Thompson catches wind that he's going to be the backup even in August, he's out.
But I think he would start. I think under the scenario,
under that scenario, he would probably start. And I'm just saying, if it was flip side, he's out.
Yeah. And that's why I had to set it up the way that I did, because I know in a scenario where he comes into the season as the backup, obviously he would be gone. Let's go away from the quarterback discussion for a little bit.
Okay.
Buy or sell.
look at the screen. So, hello.
Welcome. Subscribe. Hit that subscribe button.
Yeah, hit this. If you want more F-bombs, hit that subscribe button and hit the like button down below. By the way,
where that came from.
Go for it.
All right, you ready?
Sorry. Yeah.
Buy or sell. Jordan Whittington is the MVP of tomorrow's spring game.
Sell.
I'm going to buy it.
You're going to buy that. Okay.
I'm going to buy it because I think he's going to catch passes from both quarterbacks. And I don't know that any of the other receivers on the team, the passing game on some level has to have, they want to use him, I think, the way creatively. And I don't think that means we'll see a lot of it tomorrow, but yeah, I think we may get a little bit of the Jordan Whittington experience tomorrow. If they want to have fun and show us just a little something, it feels like he would be the guy to go through to give us that.
Yeah. I think I'm going to go with the other obvious one, but I want to put a caveat because I always believe that chaos sometimes rules the day. I might put a buy that Roschon Johnson ends up being the MVP just to mess with all our heads. Just to mess with all our heads all off season long. Like I would put my money on Bijan, but I believe in chaos. I believe those things happen, and I could totally see a scenario where Roschon Johnson rushes for over 100 yards, 2 touchdowns, and everyone's like, yeah, what is this? What is this going on here? So I'm going to go with Bijan, but if I had 10 on 100 on a bet, a $10 bet, if I had 100 on a bet and I had to go to the Vegas, I'd put my 80 on Bijan, but I'd put 20 on Roschon just because I know the payout would be higher and I might clean up.
You might be getting 20-1 on your Roschon money. The odds on Jordan and Bijan and the quarterbacks, they're the top 4 guys. And Roschon is going to be getting touches.
He's going to get.
He will.
Yeah, if they split, and especially if they split up the team, if they're not on the same team, I mean, there's no telling. Like, there's just chaos. Can I tell you a funny story? I don't know if I told you the story before. It was a few years ago, and I want to say it was 2016. And it was after the spring game, and one of the reporters asked, they said, okay, name somebody who stood out here in the spring game that you think we'll never hear from again. Because you know how it happens every year, catch it? Every year there's someone that stands out in the spring game, and you say, I'll never hear from that person again. And I said, Deontay Foreman. I was like, this is a fluke. I've never seen this. It was like around 100 yards. And I was a huge Chris Warren fan. Like I was, as much as people want to put Tyrone Swoops on me, like Chris Warren, that was my guy. You couldn't tell me nothing about Chris Warren. And I was like, Chris Warren's going to be the guy. And for about 4 games of that year, Chris Warren was the guy until he got hurt. Then Deontay Foreman ends up winning the Doak Walker. So that happened.
Yeah, details. All right. Just details. That's all that is.
I just love that story, though.
Buy or sell, Joshua Moore will remind us that he's still in the program tomorrow.
Buy. Yeah, there is. I think Joshua Moore, if I have any inkling of what I feel like he is as a human being, I think he shows up. I think there's a pride part of him that shows up. I think there's a toughness part of him that's going to show up, and I think at the end of the day, I think we'll feel Joshua Moore.
I feel like there's a Joshua Moore that Steve Sarkisian hasn't seen yet, except on film, and probably not. When games begin, Joshua Moore becomes a different animal, and I think eventually they'll figure out how to tap into that. And maybe he'll never consistently be Devin Duvernay in his final year, right? Like you won't be able to set your watch to 7 catches and 80 yards into every game. But he still may be a guy that gets you 8 to 10 touchdowns this year. And like that guy, and those 8 might come in 4 games, but it'll be a valuable 8. And he's, and I meant to mention the thing about Chris Warren, another sidebar number 2. He was really good in camp with the Raiders.
He was.
It looked like he was easily going to make that team. And then he got hurt. And then they always describe like his work habits as being terrible. And then he just never got it.
I don't know where he is.
He's not playing football that I'm aware of.
What's crazy is I think that year, I think he led the NFL in preseason rushing that year. So, I mean, it was, if he didn't get injured, Chris Warren was going to make the 53-man roster. Sean Gruden was talking about him. Like it was, it was crazy. Like it was going to happen. It is the weirdest. I've never seen a guy catch, you follow football for years, I covered the NFL for years. I've never seen a guy come that close to making a 53-man roster to never playing again.
Yeah, man. Nobody wanted him at all. Like I thought for sure.
Fascinating thing.
I thought somebody that would have played against him in one of those training camp games would have been like, well, we should bring that guy to camp. And it just didn't happen.
No.
Buy or sell, a tight end emerges as a buzzy name coming out of tomorrow.
Sell.
Ooh, I'm slightly concerned that Jared Wiley has received almost virtually no buzz throughout camp.
Yes.
I would have thought in January, if we were having a conversation of what's the trinity of offensive player parts, I wouldn't have thought we would come out of the spring talking about it being Bijan, Roschon, and Whittington. I think I would have thought Bijan, Whittington, Wiley. Running back, wide receiver, tight end. And it just hasn't happened yet. And it makes me still want to scoop up as much Jared Wiley stock as I can find, because I have to believe before it's all said and done, that guy separates.
I was just checking. Making sure we were working. So that's why you weren't hearing yourself. I was just checking to make sure everything was working on the end. So I pulled it up on my phone just to make sure we were. I was like, oh, shit.
Yesterday. That's the thing I did yesterday.
Yes. I was like, we're 44 minutes in. Let me make sure we're actually working. And then, so of course, I didn't know how to turn off the sound. I'm concerned about that and a little bit. And it's fascinating sometimes, because when I hear certain things and sometimes it reminds me of Tom a little bit. And I'm trying not to be that person. Like, this seems a little familiar. But sometimes I'm like, okay, Cade Brewer ahead of Jared Wiley. Okay. Bijan Robinson may not get as many touches. He may not be the bell cow. Okay. Going to run 12 personnel. I'm like, okay. The defense is really similar to last year's defense. There's a lot of you replace Joker with the edge guy. I mean, and you're like, okay. I'm just like, all right, maybe it's going to be better executed. Like that. That's what I have to kind of tell myself, because when we start talking to the tight end conversation, it gives me that whole, this sounds a little familiar. That's all. Sometimes it sounds a little familiar.
Well, and we talked about this earlier in the week. Like, I don't think there's a huge difference between Steve Sarkisian and Tom Herman in terms of the way they see the world. What Texas is hoping for is that Sarkisian is that very small percentage that goes from very good to great in college football. Lincoln Riley has it. Like, I bet if we hung around Lincoln Riley for a month, he would sound a lot like Tom. The difference is in the margins of ability, and that he's elite and he can sound any hell the way he wants to when you're elite. And Tom Herman just never got over the mountain of very good. And Texas is gambling in the high. I wouldn't say gambling, but slightly, because Sarkisian doesn't arrive as a ready-made, bona fide guarantee on the box as a head coach. That's not what he's been yet so far in his career. He might have become that at USC, but I agree with you, and I asked that question somewhat because of the Cade Brewer. He won't go away completely. And not that that's fair, that he should go away. I just think there's a number of us that believe that Jared Wiley is a future pro. And if that's the case, he should be a guy who is, and I don't know that we view Cade Brewer that way. And because of such, it makes me wonder, why it hasn't yet translated, and eventually it will. Okay. Buy or sell number, whatever question we're on.
I think we're on 3.
Okay. Buy or sell question number 3. I thought we were on 4. Ray Thornton gets a sack tomorrow.
Buy. I think he gets 2.
What? He
Yeah,
hasn't had 2 in his whole LSU career.
Man, look, they're talking about Ray Thornton like this guy's the second coming of like Ray Lewis. Okay, like that's the hype that we're hearing about this guy. So yeah, I mean, everyone is Catch. What other name have you heard praise this entire offseason more than Ray Thornton?
I feel like Sarkisian has praised Ray Thornton, but I don't feel like anybody that I've talked to has. So. But they all, other than he looks like $1 million, you know what I mean? I feel like with Ray Thornton, I'm getting the Casey Thompson speech somewhat, which, with all due respect to the fact that Casey Thompson, as we've already outlined, has played well in games to the extent that he's got a track record. But when we talk about the intangibles, I feel like we've heard a lot of stuff about Ray Thornton where he looks the part and he's been a leader on the field and he looks good in a uniform. And now I want to hear people say, and he's kicking ass in practice and is our best pass rusher by a significant margin. Thank God we got him. Like, I'm not hearing that yet. It's why tomorrow's really interesting, because I want to, if that dude gets 2 sacks, then we're talking about him in the spring game tomorrow, in the post game show. And I think it alleviates a little pressure in terms of what we think about that position, because outside of him right now, I don't know who is rushing the passer.
Jacoby Jones, the only other name we've heard.
And we know, I feel like we know what Jacoby is. Solid player. But he's not a guy that's going to give you double-digit sacks. And frankly, Joseph Osai last year wasn't a double-digit sack guy. I mean, we talk about double-digit sacks. Like, it's easy to come by. Put some respect on a guy like Charles Omenihu's name. Like, as it turns out, week in and week out, accumulating those numbers is harder than it looks on paper. And they got to get pressure from somewhere. And if in my mind, Jacoby Jones is a 3.5 sack guy this year, and Ray Thornton is 3.
Wow. So you're saying it's hype.
Yeah, I think until Ray Thornton shows me in games, it's hype. It's hype.
Wow.
He was not a good player at LSU. He just wasn't. He was just a guy. And, I'm not saying that he doesn't have the ability to transcend what he's already done, but more times than not, that doesn't happen. Certainly doesn't happen. When Alex and we all had this conversation about Denzel Okafor yesterday. Can a guy after 4 or 5 years completely reinvent himself in a way that he's significantly better than anything that we've ever said before? It's hard to believe that's possible. It can happen. I need Ray Thornton to show me that he's that guy in games, because so far in a lengthy LSU career, he never did that. He didn't.
Steve Sarkisian says Denzel Okafor was the best offensive lineman in the spring.
And it is either A, worrisome, or B, a reflection of you can't really take anything coaches say completely at face value. That there's always an angle. There's always the possibility that they're just saying stuff because they want to say stuff. Like, it's either he was just talking a little shit, or what he said is true, and that's worrisome. Because Denzel Okafor being this team's best offensive lineman, based on everything we know about Denzel Okafor through the first 5 years of his career, that's a bad development. That is, Texas fans were not going to lose sleep if Denzel Okafor didn't come back. If Denzel Okafor was like, I'm going to the NFL, I've been here long enough, or I'm going to be a grad transfer and go someplace else, I think Texas fans would have been like, yeah, we'll be okay. It sucks. Like, he would have been good for depth. I remember exactly what those conversations sounded like when he decided to come back. It was like, cool, we need someone in case somebody gets hurt. So that he's the best guy right now, at least in the words of Steve Sarkisian, again, is either A, worrisome, or B, proof that sometimes you just got to roll your eyes a little bit. Man.
Look at
I'm just saying he hasn't. Whereas your problem is asking that I'm saying Ray Thornton isn't damn good. He hasn't been. I can't. I'm like Anwar talking about Hudson Card. I can't say that Ray Thornton is all that in a bag of chips when there's no track record yet. There's no body of evidence that supports that statement. And at least, and even with Hudson, it's a little different because he's younger. I mean, Ray Thornton's not like a guy that was at LSU for 2 years and then transferred. He did his whole LSU career. And he just hasn't been an impact player. I think that's a hell of a profile for your pass rush to be leaning on. Suarez, I almost referenced that yesterday for exactly this reason.
Juarez is like got receipts. Like, I got to give Juarez credit. Like Juarez is pulling receipts, boy. I sure hope you don't have nothing on me, because I just keep talking about everybody else. Juarez, I know you got something on me. You got something bookmarked. He's gonna pull out from damn near 2014. Remember when Anwar said this about such and such? Like, Juarez is a bad man. I don't want to F with him.
Anwar, the good thing about messing up all the time and saying stupid things all the time is that people don't have to go back to 2014 to find them. Like, I'm like Hansel and Gretel. I just leave crumbs everywhere. Just pick one up. That's cool.
Yeah.
just be original. Don't give me the same old ones. Is all I'm saying.
I think what happens when you start to make bold declarations, like he's a damn good coach, and this is why I'm going to show you why, that's when this shit like really kind of bites you.
Well, I mean, Marquette thinks Shaka's a damn good coach.
I mean, that's
you know
fine.
what Marquette thinks? Marquette thinks Texas is just an impossible place. The boosters are out of control. The admin doesn't support. Like they'll work. You tell yourself the things you need to tell yourself to help you put your head on a pillow at night and go to sleep snugly. And it's I'm fascinated, because Garrett Gilbert left Texas, but he's still in the NFL. And there's always this weird, he wasn't a success at Texas, but he literally just started a game for America's team this past year and has earned his pension, which is no easy feat, right? Like, it's hard. Like, NFL teams go out of their way to not pay pensions. So he got his pension. So it allows me to feel like I was right on Garrett Gilbert, even though he was a massive, colossal failure. And we just talked about Chris Warren somewhat in that same capacity. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's funny sometimes the margins of being right and wrong on these things. But yes, I'm fascinated to see what Shaka Smart does moving forward. Because like, what if he wins a conference championship in the first year? He might still get bounced out of, let's say he loses he still loses in the first round of the NCAA tournament, but he wins a conference tournament or conference championship. And it's like, well, he didn't do that at Texas. Like, it'll be all kinds of weird. Same thing if Tom ever has long-term success anywhere else. I would say Charlie, but it feels like that ship has sailed.
Yeah, but when Charlie got fired, even as bad
You're right,
as they were, people looked at Texas like Texas was effed up. People don't look at Charlie and say, oh, Charlie is like not a bad coach. They said Texas is just a shitty place. Texas was the cesspool. Texas is all these type of things. And so USF couldn't wait to hire him. I mean, Charlie had other offers. And it was just like Charlie felt like he would be at USF for a couple of years and then transition into like University of Florida at some point, or Florida State. Like, he just felt like that's what would happen to him. But Charlie had offers, and Charlie's in Urban Meyer's like, Charlie's my guy. Coming to Jacksonville. Like, it's still working for Charlie, and same thing for Shaka. And at some point, it's going to work for Tom too. A year is going to go by, and Tom will have more offers.
Somewhere Red McCombs is saying, I said he'd be a good position coach. But
let's not do it. Let's not do it.
No, I would just say that
let's not get shut down already.
I think Shaka's getting the same treatment that Charlie got upon leaving, right? I think the national media and the national perception is that's a Texas thing and not a coach thing. And I think Texas fans would say, no, we were right. And I think history on some level, based on what happened at South Florida, has proven that Texas was right about Charlie Strong. We'll see what happens with Shaka. It may be in 3 years from now, Chris Beard's got Texas in an Elite Eight, near a Final Four, and Shaka's not getting it done at Marquette. And we'll go, oh, everybody locally did have that pegged correctly, and the national guys were wrong. I can't help myself. I will follow that story the same way that I did with Charlie and the same way that I did with Herman. Okay, we got to wrap things up. We've been going for almost nearly an hour. I've got one more buy or sell question for you.
Okay, hit me.
Buy or sell defense is the defense wins tomorrow's scrimmage / spring game.
Bye. In these instances, it always seems like somebody asked this a little bit earlier. It always seems like the defense is always ahead of the offense, especially when there's like a coaching change. And I just think defensively, it's just a little bit more simple for those defenders. Of just there's an offensive playbook that's this, and there's a defensive playbook that is probably not as as whatever the damn word is that I can't use. I got cuss words, but I can't think pull out of the source to think of something else. But in any case, because of that, I think the defense will look good. I think the flip side of that will be there could be potential confusion of what this offense looks like going forward, and maybe doesn't really clear up the conversation, as relates to KC or Hudson or anything like that. But if you asking me, I think the defense is what we walk away saying, okay, those guys look pretty good. Maybe Jordan Whittington goes off a little bit, and maybe we see a little bit more of Joshua Moore, but I'm not unless Bijan just went off or Roshan. But I'm still going to go with defense. I think defense kind of wins the day. What about you?
I'm with you. I think we'll see a couple of touchdowns by the offense, but I'm not expecting fireworks, unless the caveat being that they rig the spring game in a way so that both quarterbacks get the ones against 2s and 3s, like really rig it so that both guys are able to come out with a statistical line that makes them feel like they're building onto something. Because I do think the one thing you'd like to get out of this game is for the quarterbacks to not feel like they've taken a step backwards, both of them, or one of them, right? Like either or. You don't want one of these guys to come out of this 4 of 11. And
no,
it just sets, and I think the healthiest thing that can happen is if both guys come out of this 10 of 15 ish. Not, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't need to be sexy. If each guy gets a touchdown pass, or one guy gets 2 and the other one gets 1, but they're somewhat modestly successful, not over the top, but nobody has a putrid performance, I think that's a win. I'm not sure that the two quarterbacks get there, though. I think the defense may win the scrimmage in a way that unless they rig it, the defense will win the day.
Okay. I got a quick buy sell for you, and then I'll let you close out on this.
Okay.
And I think I asked you this earlier, but I just want to go back to it. But buy or sell, by the time it's 4:00 and the game is over, you will have a good idea of what this team will look like in the upcoming season.
Sell.
Okay.
In part because they do have the 4 transfers coming in if you include the Notre Dame transfer. So you've got that coming in as a pass rush help. You've got DeMarvion Overshone on defense. You've got Troy O'Meara still emerging. He's going to get some reps tomorrow, it sounds like, maybe a few. But the full impact of whatever it is that he's going to be, I don't think we'll see that tomorrow. There's no Josh Thompson tomorrow. No Derek Kerstetter necessarily. Like, I think that there's that alone is 6 or 7 additional pieces of the puzzle that are potential starting pieces that we won't see tomorrow. So knowing that in theory they could add 3 more to that list, we might be talking about 10 starting level players that won't be on the field tomorrow when we get a chance to look at them. So with all due respect to what that feels like a really high number, I'll say no super broad general conclusions about what we'll see in August or September, mostly September and October, I suppose, just based off tomorrow. Even if we, Anwar, you and I have seen every snap of all these guys, you know what I mean? Like, I say that knowing that we feel like we know who this team is to some degree. nothing good or bad could happen tomorrow that will shake me off of. I'm at 8-4 and wondering whether or not to go to 9-3, but I just can't see a 10-2 right now.
Can I get one more buy or sell?
Sure.
Can I get just one more in here. OU is supposed to have their spring game tomorrow. Buy or sell. Texas fans definitely want their quarterback to look better than Spencer Rattler.
Well, why? They do. But good luck with that. I mean,
because he's going to throw for like 5 touchdowns tomorrow in the spring game.
As he should. I mean, he was really good by the end of the season. I think Steve Sarkisian and this entire Texas program have to hope they didn't miss the Rattler window, because the anticipation is that there's a much, much better player there than they even saw a year ago. That's what it's going to take to get Texas over this hump. Texas has to have better quarterback play than Oklahoma has. And Oklahoma is set up for the next 2 years or so minimum with Rattler, where if you're going to get over the Oklahoma hump, you better be able. This is like Star Wars. I don't mean like Star Wars the movie. I mean like Star Wars when the U.S. and the Russians were pointing nukes at each other. And if you're going to win that battle, the thought was you better have a bunch of nukes so that if they got 500, you got 500, and everybody's just scared that one day everybody will just get blown up. So then nobody ever fires off a missile because everybody's afraid. Good deal that happened. That Oklahoma's got a nuclear missile pointed at Texas. And last year that guy got benched and Texas couldn't take advantage of it. Now the stakes at the quarterback position and for the Texas program are higher. It will be in some ways more difficult to win that game this year than it was last year. And it is the elephant in the room in the Texas football discussion. There is still an Oklahoma mountain that has to be climbed. And it looked like on paper last year that was the year to do it when you had a senior at quarterback and OU was breaking in a newbie and they couldn't do it. And now Oklahoma's not breaking in a newbie for a hot minute. And you're trying to figure out who your guy is. They know who their guy is. And in 5 months, your guy's got to be ready to go toe-to-toe with that guy. Or you could lose by 20.
I mean, it's real though, Catch. I mean, it is real. I think we talked about it previously. You've got to have a quarterback that can go against Spencer Rattler, Brock Purdy. I mean, that's just to win this conference. So
I think Brock Purdy's kind of a jag. NFL people do you know he was not good, full stop, for the first 8 or 9 games of their season. Like, he had a 135 quarterback rating until the final 2 weeks of the season. And I think it kind of got bumped up to 150-ish when it was all said and done. There's some fool's gold there at Iowa State, but they got their whole team coming back. So that tide will lift his boat. But I think Rattler is super talented. And it's just about whether or not he gets into the matrix and the game slows down for him. If that ever happens, he's got a chance to be a Heisman winner. And that's who you've got to beat. Sorry.
No, I mean, it's fair. But by the way, last year against Texas, Purdy was, 25 of 36 for 312 and a touch. Sam was 17 of 29 for 298 and 1 touchdown. So, I mean, I'd say, they're probably even as far as that is concerned. So, I'm just saying you've got to be probably better than that guy because Texas lost.
Yeah, and I'm just saying I don't think Brock Purdy's an All-America good kind of player.
No.
Right?
No.
But I think Rattler has a chance to be. And, you know, the elephant in the room is that when these two teams play in October, it will be very tough to beat Oklahoma unless your quarterback's playing at a high level. That is the Big 12. That has been the Big 12. And it's funny because someone in the chat was like, Kenneth Evans was like, Mountain, they went to 3 overtimes last year. Oklahoma has won. What are we up to? 5 or 6?
I think it's 6. I got to look it up. I think it's 6.
6 big. I don't have enough fingers on my hand to count the number of Big 12 championships in a row that they've won. It is an OU mountain. It is. And you can say they went to 3 overtimes last year, but it shouldn't have gone. It took a comeback to get there. And that was, it's weird. That whole Texas OU game a year ago, it does not make sense all the way to the point where Sam is standing by himself.
Yeah, you're right. It is 6, starting from 2015. All right, let's do it. Damn, he left. He went off. I don't know what happened to Catch. Must have been television. His laptop must have died. So anyway, what he was going to say was, we'll be back here tomorrow after the spring game. So make sure that you get ready for some wins. After Steve Sarkisian talks to the media, we'll get the live stream started. So I'll be here. He'll be here. Make sure you hit like, hit subscribe. If you hit subscribe, then you'll make sure you won't be able to miss it. But hit like and subscribe. Support us in this new endeavor. We will be back talking about breaking out everything spring related. We'll have more videos in the upcoming weeks. So we'll be ready to rock and roll. We'll be here for you. Hey, you guys, Catch just evaporated. Like, I don't even know what happened. And you guys got my whole kind of background of my house here with him out here. So, hey, you guys take care. Be safe on those roads. I'll